Single dad paid for a soldier and her son after her card was declined, unaware she was a field general. The rain came down in heavy sheets, turning the narrow streets of Maplewood into rivers of silver under the dim glow of street lamps. It was nearly midnight when Clara Bennett pushed open the door of the roadside diner, her long coat dripping water onto the worn linoleum floor. A little boy clung to her hand, his eyes wide and tired, his sneakers soaked through. The bell above the door gave a soft jingle, and the few customers scattered across the booths turned to look. For a moment, the warmth and smell of frying bacon wrapped around them like a blanket. Clara managed a polite nod before ushering her son toward a corner table. "2 hot chocolates, please," she said softly to the waitress behind the counter. "And, if the kitchen's still open, maybe a grilled cheese for him." The waitress, a girl barely out of high school, smiled kindly and tapped the order into the register. "That'll be $9.85. Clara reached for her wallet with trembling fingers. The leather was cracked, the zipper half broken. She slid her debit card across the counter, praying silently. Declined. She swallowed hard. Tried again. Declined. A tight knot formed in her chest. She fumbled for cash, pulling out a few crumpled bills and loose coins from her coat pocket. It wasn't enough. Bash, the little boy, Ethan, tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy, it's okay. I'm not that hungry." But she saw the way his lips trembled, the way his eyes darted toward the steaming plates passing by. Clara's heart clenched. She opened her mouth to tell the waitress she would just take 1 hot chocolate, when a voice cut through the soft hum of the diner. "I've got it." A man stepped forward from a booth near the window. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp from the rain, and his flannel shirt clung to him slightly. He didn't hesitate as he handed the waitress a $10 bill. Clara turned to him, startled. "Sir, you don't have to." "I know," he said simply, "but I want to." Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, she saw something in him. Steadiness, weariness, and an odd familiarity she couldn't place. "Thank you," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes. He gave a small nod, then returned to his seat, his hands wrapping around a chipped coffee mug. Ethan's gaze followed him curiously. "Is he a superhero, Mommy?" Ethan asked in a whisper. Clara managed a faint smile. "Maybe, baby, maybe." As the waitress brought over their drinks, Clara couldn't stop glancing at the man. There was something about the way he sat, calm and observant, as though he'd seen more storms than just the one outside. And though she didn't know it yet, that rainy night in a quiet diner would mark the beginning of something neither of them expected, a story of healing, quiet courage, and a chance at love that would bloom in the most unlikely place. The rain was heavier now, pounding against the diner windows in relentless waves. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, deep and low like a distant warning. Clara glanced nervously at the clock above the counter, 12:47 a.m. Her car sat in the parking lot, old and temperamental, and she wasn't sure if it would even start in this weather. Ethan had fallen asleep against her shoulder, his small fingers clutching the hem of her coat. She brushed a damp curl from his forehead and exhaled shakily. "You driving in this?" The voice startled her. She looked up to see the man standing a few feet away, holding his coffee mug in one hand, a set of keys dangling from the other. Up close, he seemed older than she first thought, maybe mid-30s, with faint lines around his eyes and a steadiness in his expression that made her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. Clara straightened her posture, reflexively protective. "I don't really have a choice." "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone calm, unassuming. "South End. Little motel off Route 9. He gave a slight nod, glanced out the rain-streaked window, then back at her. "That car of yours. I saw it when I came in. You're not making it up the hill in this storm." She tensed. "We'll manage." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm not trying to scare you, just offering you a ride." Clara's instincts screamed caution. She taught herself to never rely on strangers, never accept kindness without questioning motives. But something in his tone, the utter lack of pressure, made her pause. "My name's Mason," he added. "I run a little auto shop 2 miles from here. Got a cabin up the ridge." Warm, dry. You and your boy can wait out the storm there. Clara studied him closely, searching for any hint of threat in his eyes, his stance, the way his fingers drummed lightly on his coffee mug. Nothing. Only quiet patience. "I'm not in the habit of following strangers into the woods," she said flatly. "You shouldn't be," Mason agreed. "But you don't look like the type to trust easily. And I don't look like the type to hurt a woman and her kid." Clara's jaw tightened. He wasn't wrong. She looked down at Ethan, now sleeping soundly, his breathing soft and even. The storm outside roared like an animal, and she pictured them stranded on the roadside in the cold, her car's heater rattling uselessly. "Fine," she said finally, her voice firm. "But if this goes sideways, you won't get far before I make you regret it." Mason gave a faint smile. Not mocking, just acknowledging. Fair enough. He waited while she adjusted Ethan's hood and gathered their small bag, then led the way to his old pickup truck. The night air hit her like ice as they stepped outside. Rain soaked through her shoes instantly. Mason opened the passenger door and handed her a folded blanket. "For him," he said simply. Clara climbed in, her shoulders rigid, her mind running through every possible scenario. Escape routes, reflexes honed from years of surviving on her own. But as the truck rumbled to life and Mason pulled out onto the slick, winding road, a strange calm settled over her. He didn't speak, didn't fill the silence with questions or small talk. The only sounds were the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers and the steady hum of the engine. And though she would never have admitted it, Clara felt for the first time in months a sliver of warmth that wasn't just from the heater. The drive up the ridge was slow and silent, the headlights slicing through sheets of rain as the pickup truck growled against the incline. Clara kept her arms wrapped tightly around Ethan, her gaze fixed on the winding road ahead. Every now and then she stole a glance at Mason's profile. Calm, focused, his hands steady on the wheel. "You live up here alone?" she asked finally, her voice low but edged with caution. "Not alone," he replied without looking at her. "My daughter lives with me." Clara's brows furrowed. She hadn't expected that. The truck crested a final hill, and there it was, a small wooden cabin nestled among pines, warm golden light spilling from its windows like a beacon in the storm. Smoke curled from the chimney, disappearing into the black sky. For a moment, Clara felt her shoulders relax, though her fingers never loosened their grip on Ethan's coat. Mason parked, shut off the engine, and turned toward her. "You can stay the night here. Storm like this isn't letting up anytime soon." Clara hesitated, then nodded curtly. The cabin door opened before they could knock, and a little girl with auburn hair and wide hazel eyes peeked out. She wore mismatched socks and clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest. "Daddy?" "Hey, Lily," Mason said gently. "We've got guests." Lily's eyes widened as she spotted Clara and Ethan. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether to retreat or wave them in. Then she stepped back, holding the door wider. "It's warm in here," she whispered. Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Thank you, sweetheart." Inside, the cabin was small but alive, with the scent of cedarwood and bread fresh from the oven. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Clara felt heat seep into her damp clothes, her body thawing even as her mind stayed alert. "Sit by the fire," Mason said, already moving to hang their wet coats. "I'll get towels." Clara guided Ethan to the couch, where he curled up instantly, his eyelids heavy with sleep. Lily hovered nearby, watching him with curiosity. "Is he your brother?" she asked softly. "He's my son," Clara replied, her voice warmer now. "Oh." Lily hugged her rabbit tighter. "He can have my blanket if he's cold." Clara blinked, momentarily disarmed by the offer. "That's very kind of you." By the time Mason returned with towels and a steaming mug of tea, Ethan was asleep, his small hand still gripping his mother's sleeve. Clara sat rigidly at the edge of the couch, scanning the room as though memorizing every exit. "You're safe here," Mason said quietly. setting the mug down within her reach. Clara looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time without suspicion. "I'll decide that," she said softly but not unkindly. Mason didn't argue. He only nodded, then crouched to stoke the fire. For a long moment the cabin was silent save for the crackle of flames and the distant roar of rain on the roof. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something unfamiliar creeping in. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest spark of possibility. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. The rain eased into a steady drizzle as night deepened around the little cabin. Mason had made soup, simple but hearty, and now the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room. Clara sat at the small kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug. She wasn't used to stillness like this. Stillness, in her experience, usually meant something was about to go wrong. "You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder," Mason said quietly, breaking the silence. He stood by the stove, ladling soup into bowls. "It's just us here." Clara's eyes darted to him, guarded. "Old habits die hard." "I know." His voice was steady, unintrusive, like he wasn't trying to pry, but understood more than he let on. "How would you know?" she asked, before she could stop herself. He glanced at her then, his gaze calm but edged with something deeper. "Because I've been there too." Clara looked away, unsure how to respond. When he brought the bowls to the table, they ate in silence for a few moments. Lily, his daughter, sat beside Ethan on the couch, showing him how to fold paper cranes. Their soft voices and occasional giggles felt like echoes from another life, a quieter, gentler one. "You were in the medical field," Mason said after a while, not as a question but a statement. Clara's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "How could you tell?" "The way you checked your son for signs of fever when you thought no one was looking. The way you scanned me earlier, not just sizing me up, but cataloging vital signs." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I was a trauma nurse before." "Before?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around her spoon. "Before I lost my husband. Before I stopped believing I could save anyone." Mason nodded slowly, not pushing, not judging. "And you?" she asked, deflecting. "You read people too easily for a mechanic." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Firefighter, for 12 years, until the collapse." Clara's breath caught. She didn't need to ask which collapse. She'd seen it on the news. An apartment building gutted by flames, 3 lives lost. "You made it out," she said softly. "Barely." His fingers curled around his mug. "Lost my partner in the process. After that, I couldn't walk back into a burning building again." The room went quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire. For a moment, they weren't two strangers in a storm. They were two people carrying scars the world didn't see. Clara broke the silence first. "I'm sorry about your partner, and I'm sorry about your husband." Their eyes met across the table, a flicker of recognition passing between them. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something quieter, understanding. Morning came slowly to the cabin, the soft gray light of dawn seeping through the curtains. Clara sat at the edge of the couch, cradling a steaming mug Mason had placed in her hands minutes earlier. Ethan was still curled up under a blanket beside Lily, their small breaths rising and falling in unison. For the first time in months, Clara felt something close to peace. Until her phone buzzed. "Abba." She flinched. Mason, who was tending the fire, glanced over but said nothing. Clara stared at the cracked screen. The caller ID read St. Jude's Hospital. Her thumb hovered over the button before she answered. "Clara? It's Dr. Reynolds." The voice was urgent. Too urgent. "We need you back." She swallowed hard. "It's been almost a year, doctor." "I know," the voice softened slightly. "But this is different. We're overwhelmed." A viral outbreak. Bad. Staff are dropping left and right. We need experienced trauma nurses who can think on their feet. You are one of the best. Clara's hand tightened around the phone. Memories she thought she'd buried surged back. Bright lights, bloodied scrubs, the sound of monitors screaming into chaos. "I'm not sure I'm the person you remember anymore," she murmured. "You are," Dr. Reynolds insisted. "This isn't just a job, Clara. It's a call." Clara's throat felt tight. She hung up without answering, her chest rising and falling too fast. "Bad news?" Mason's voice was quiet but steady. "They want me back." He didn't ask where. He didn't have to. The weight in her tone told him enough. "You thinking about going?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I've spent so long trying to hold everyone else together, and now I can barely hold myself." Mason nodded, crouching to feed another log into the fire. "Sounds like you're afraid." Clara shot him a sharp look. "Of course I'm afraid. I can't go back there and leave Ethan behind." "Then don't." His reply was so simple it startled her. "They called you because they know you'll say yes," Mason said evenly. "But just because the world keeps asking doesn't mean you have to bleed for it." Clara turned away, staring at the foggy window. Outside, the storm had passed, but the world still felt heavy. "I don't even know how to stop," she whispered. "Maybe," Mason said softly, "it's not about stopping. Maybe it's about choosing who you save first." Clara didn't respond. But later, as she watched Ethan and Lily playing by the fire, laughter bubbling in the warm air, a thought settled deep in her chest. For once, she wanted to choose him. The sun dipped low over the ridge, painting the sky in muted pinks and golds. Clara stood outside the cabin, her coat pulled tight against the evening chill. The folded letter from St. Jude's weighed heavy in her pocket like a stone she couldn't put down. Inside, she could hear Ethan laughing as Lily showed him how to stack dominoes in intricate patterns. The sound of their giggles echoed in her chest, warm and fragile. "You've been quiet all day," Mason said gently. She turned to find him leaning against the porch railing, his arms folded loosely, his steady gaze fixed on her. He'd been careful to give her space, and yet his presence was constant, solid in a way she wasn't used to. "I can't stop thinking about it," she admitted. "If I don't go back, more people might die." "And if you do go back?" Mason asked. Clara exhaled sharply. "If I do, I don't know if I'll ever make it out again. Not really. Part of me didn't the first time." For a long moment, they said nothing. The only sound was the wind whispering through the pines and the faint crackle of the fire inside. "I've spent my whole life trying to save people," Clara murmured. "Even when I was breaking apart, I kept telling myself it was worth it." "And was it?" Mason's voice was soft but steady. "I don't know anymore." Mason pushed away from the railing and took a step closer. "Clara, the world's always going to need someone like you. But maybe, for once, your son needs you more." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to say it wasn't that simple, but the words caught in her throat. "You've given so much of yourself to everyone else," Mason continued. "When was the last time you kept something back for you?" Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. She looked away, blinking hard. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he admitted. "But maybe the hardest missions aren't about saving others. They're about learning how to stay, to build something that doesn't disappear when the sirens stop." Clara stared at him, her breath hitching. "You're not just a nurse, Clara. You're a mother. And you deserve more than scraps of peace between battles." Her hand trembled as she pulled the folded letter from her pocket. Slowly, she tore it in half, then again, until the pieces fluttered to the ground like fragile snow. Mason watched silently, his expression unreadable. "I can't keep fighting the world," she whispered. "Not if it means losing him, losing myself." He reached out then, not forceful, not urgent. Just a simple gesture, his palm open between them. Clara stared at it for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling. The storm had passed. For the first time in days, sunlight spilled gently through the pine trees, turning the melting snow into tiny rivers that ran down the hill behind Mason's cabin. Clara stood in the small kitchen, barefoot on the cool wood floor, pouring milk into mismatched mugs. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and for once, Her face was calm, not guarded, not weary, just calm. Ethan and Lily sat cross-legged near the hearth, building what they called a fortress out of couch cushions and Mason's old toolboxes. Their laughter echoed through the room like the sweetest kind of music. Mason stepped in from outside, his boots leaving damp prints on the floor. He carried a bundle of firewood under one arm and a packet of seeds in his other hand. "What's that for?" Clara asked, nodding to the seeds. "A garden," he said simply. "Figured we could plant something, start fresh." She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You think I'm the gardening type?" "I think you're the rebuilding type," Mason replied, setting the wood by the fire. Clara watched him for a long moment. He wasn't the kind of man who filled silence with words, and maybe that's why his presence felt so steady, like an anchor she hadn't known she needed. That afternoon, they worked side by side in the patch of thawing earth behind the cabin. Clara rolled up her sleeves, her hands raw from turning the soil, but she didn't complain. For the first time in years, the ache in her muscles felt good, alive. Ethan darted around with a tiny watering can while Lily carefully placed seeds into the shallow rows Mason dug. "This one's gonna grow the tallest," Lily declared proudly. "Why's that?" Mason asked. "Because we planted it together," she said simply. Clara's hands stilled in the dirt. She glanced at Mason, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep in a tangle of blankets and dreams, Clara and Mason sat on the porch, mugs of tea warming their hands. "You really think I can do this?" Clara asked softly. "Stay, be a mom, build something that lasts?" Mason turned to her, his gaze steady in the fading light. "You already are." Clara blinked hard, her throat tight. "And you?" she asked. "You've been carrying a lot too." "I'm learning to set it down," Mason admitted. "Slowly, one day at a time." They sat in silence for a while, watching as stars pricked the sky. Then Clara reached out and laced her fingers through his. "I don't know what happens next," she murmured. "You don't have to," Mason said quietly. "You just have to stay long enough to find out." And for the first time in years, she wanted to. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.